By the middle of 1942, most of Europe was under German control. Even in North Africa, the British army had been pushed back to the gates of Cairo. For Hitler, everything was going to plan. He could travel round his new empire virtually unchallenged. He was delighted with the way things were going. But for the Allies, there'd been no victories in Europe for over a year. All attempts to breach the German defences in the north had failed. Churchill's plan was to liberate Europe from the south, perhaps through Italy. And that meant hanging on to Malta, whatever the cost.
Churchill and the chiefs of staff had decided that Malta was so important for the future strategy, the invasion of North Africa coming up, that it had to be relieved. And so they assembled the biggest assembly of warships to escort this convoy of any single naval operation, Royal Naval operation, during the war.
At the time of Operation Pedestal, Lord Lewin was a junior gunnery officer in the destroyer Ashanti.
Malta needed food, it needed fuel, because there's no indigenous fuel. It needed fuel for the fighters, that's high-octane petrol. It needed diesel fuel for the submarines that were operating from there, coal to run the power station. This was the sort of cross-section of cargo. And because we knew we were likely to lose ships, every ship was loaded with a complete cross-section. They had food, fuel, ammunition, torpedoes, bombs, shells, and on deck, cased high-octane fuel in 5-gallon cans, which would go up, at the slightest bang. So each merchant ship was a bomb waiting to go off.
Well, 1942 was the heaviest period of bombing by the Germans, who had replaced the Italians in the bombing, regular bombing of Malta. I was a medical officer at the time, an army medical officer, and I can recall first the Ju-88 coming in waves of 100 at a time. These were the type of bombing which brought great havoc on Malta, and proportionately to our population, probably we were the most bombed out area during the war.
We'd reached the point really on the island, both the civilian population and the military personnel, when we realized that surrender was probably the word that we were thinking about, if not talking too much about. It had got that drastic with the shortage of food, shortage of ammunition. Many people said, how long can we go on like this?
They brought ships from everywhere. One of the carriers came from the Indian Ocean, one was stationed at Gib and came out into the Atlantic to join the others, and the others came down from Scapa. Escorts were taken from the western approaches and from the home fleet, and indeed a lot of the ships, including the one that I was in, had just come straight off a North Russian convoy.
Captain of the destroyer HMS Bramham was Eddie Baines.
There was hardly anything left, nothing left in the bag at all. And if you wanted to get those number of ships together, you really had to scratch the ends of the earth to pull them out, and that's what happened everywhere.
There were 59 naval vessels escorting this convoy of 14 ships. Probably there's never been such a powerful escort.
Eric King Turner was a member of the medical team on the aircraft carrier Indomitable.
They were very fine merchant ships because there weren't many left that could steam 15 knots. And it was a 15-knot convoy. And they'd been gathered, I believe, from all over the place, including 2 or 3 American ships.
Getting together 14 merchant ships, big enough and fast enough for this vital convoy, was no easy task. the Allies had been losing them at a horrifying rate. In the previous month alone, the Allies lost nearly 600,000 tons of shipping, well over 100 merchant ships. The British ships chosen for this convoy were the very best available, but help was still needed from America.
We shall send you in ever-increasing numbers ships, planes, tanks, guns. That is our purpose and our pledge.
So 2 American cargo ships, the Santa Elisa and the Almeria Lykes, were picked for Operation Pedestal. And at Kings Point Academy, Long Island, 2 young cadets were about to join their very first ship.
Well, I was a cadet fresh out of the academy and very, very enthusiastic about our first trip at sea. So we were very anxious to get off and get on to this ship, the Almeria Lykes.
It was practically brand new. We were delighted to be on a nice new ship. She was high out of the water because she was empty, and it was really very impressive.
And extremely fast. One of the, I believe, the fastest of the American cargo ships. So we felt that we had been picked for a very, very fine ship.
As they sailed for England, Winston Churchill was heading for America. The 2 countries brought closer together by the war.
You will feel that we are your worthy brothers in arms, and you will know that we shall never tire nor weaken, but march with you into any quarter of the world that may be necessary to establish the reign of justice and of law among men.
Whilst he was in America, Winston Churchill received an urgent request from England.
We have considered the means of getting oil to Malta in the next convoy. The only really satisfactory solution is to ask the President to lend the 15-knot American oiler Ohio for this purpose. We attach greatest importance to obtaining Ohio with crew and request that the Prime Minister approaches President Roosevelt as soon as possible.
And the 10,000-ton Texaco tanker was the last ship to join the convoy. When the Ohio arrived on the Clyde in Scotland, the American crew were taken off and a British crew put on. Eddie Smith was an Army gunner. When he joined the Ohio and was welcomed with a handshake, he realized something special was in store.
We were going up gangway at Ohio, and the Navy officers, maritime officers, marine officers, they all lined up. So we were going on a shacking man with everyone, you know, all the way down the line, like Queen going on board. And I thought to myself, that's the first time that's happening, oh my. And I'd done a lot of convoys. And that's the first time we ever anybody shake hands.
Air protection for the convoy would be provided by the 3 carriers, Victorious, Eagle, and the Indomitable. On the aircraft carrier Indomitable, one of the armourers was Ron Pearson.
And I remember distinctly I was in the lower hangar where our squadron was based and housed, and Frankie Cripps, one of our riggers, came down, and he said, "You want to get up top? There's ships, millions of them." And so everybody was wildly excited. We couldn't all dash at once, but I sneaked out quickly up onto the weather deck, and there they were. Nelson, Rodley, battle wagons there seemed to be, and cruisers and destroyers, and thought, goodness me, what's afoot?
John Jackson was junior radio officer on the biggest of the merchant ships, the Wimarama.
We knew we were in for a big show. We didn't know where we were going until we got to sea, until all the convoy had assembled off Glasgow. We joined ship in Liverpool, and we knew there was something afoot. We didn't know what it was. It was a highly kept secret.
To protect the merchant ships from the expected air attacks, extra armaments were fitted.
We arrived in Liverpool, and then guns, all types of anti-aircraft guns, rocket launchers, and we were just wondering where in the world they were going to put all of this.
They knew they were going to be heavily bombed, and so they were fitted with a large number of anti-aircraft weapons, Bofors guns, Oerlikon guns, and had what are known as DEMS gunners, defensive equipped merchant ship gunners, who were part of the Royal Artillery, and Royal Navy gunners on board.
Captain Mason came downstairs and he said, "Well, lads, you've all been waiting to know where you're going." He said, "We're going on a rough passage." He says, "We're going to Malta, or we're going to try."
At last, Operation Pedestal was underway. 14 of the finest merchant ships in the world, heavily armed, well protected, and ready for action.
The merchant ships were formed into the normal convoy formation of 4 columns, 3 or 4 ships in each column. So you had the core of the merchant ships in the middle, and close protecting them were the bigger ships, the cruisers and the battleships, and then outside them a ring of destroyers, a complete ring of destroyers all the way around.
The 14 merchant ships sailed from Scotland into the Atlantic, where they were joined by the main escort and headed for the Straits of Gibraltar. On the night of Sunday, the 10th of August, the fleet slipped quietly into the Mediterranean under cover of darkness. The actor, Freddie Treves, was an officer cadet on the Wimarama.
Convoy was going very slowly, very, very slowly. And then, as I was on the upper deck, I saw all these twinkling lights, and we had total blackout on the convoy. And I asked what that was of my old chap, Bodore, who was with me up in the forecastle. He was the oldest man in the ship, and I was the youngest. And he was sort of looking after me. And he said, "Oh, that's the Spanish fishing fleet."
Close by was the destroyer HMS Ledbury, its captain, Roger Hill.
Apparently there was a spy on the Spanish side who reported the ships going through. And just to make doubly sure, there was a French commercial pilot who reported the convoy. He went over the top and he reported the convoy and its course and speed and everything to do with it, which was really very friendly. And that, of course, was received by the Germans and the Italians. So they knew exactly where we were and what we were doing.
The Italians were so confident that they would defeat the Royal Navy and sink the British and American merchant ships, they decided to film the event. They called it the Battle of the Sicilian Channel.
Nella notte sul 10 agosto un grosso convoglio, fortemente scortato, passa lo Stretto di Gibilterra ed entra in Mediterraneo. Al suo passaggio le forze navali di Gibilterra prendono il mare e si uniscono al convoglio per rinforzarne la rotta.
As the convoy and its escort entered the Mediterranean, Winston Churchill flew to Moscow. He'd come to tell Stalin that the expected Second Front would not take place that year. The German defenses in France had proved to be impregnable. This was bad news for the Russian leader, with the German army dug in less than 100 miles from Moscow, and Stalingrad under siege in the south. So much now hung on the success of Operation Pedestal that Churchill requested daily reports on its progress while he was in Moscow. In the Mediterranean, the men on the convoy, now well on their way to Malta, were feeling relaxed and confident.
First day out was like having a Mediterranean cruise, really. We treated it like a Mediterranean cruise, just sitting around on the upper decks and that, and we had warnings like, you know, that all our clothing should be clean and everybody should be bathed and ready for action, like. But as I say, it was like a holiday to us.
I was so confident that everything was going to go just as smoothly as silk that I typed on my typewriter that night as we went through the Straits of Gibraltar, "Look out, Axis, here we come."
Oh, we felt reasonably secure, but being as there were all the ships there, obviously you felt, well, you know, something is going to happen.
The convoy was still out of range of the enemy bombers. Day one had passed without incident.
The convoy closed in for the night. They got close together, and in the middle were these two battleships, the Nelson and Rodney. And I always imagined them like a cock and a hen gathering their chickens in close to them for the night. And then we went to bed.
Un sommergibile all'agguato. All'approssimarsi del nemico si immerge.
I'd just come off the forenoon watch about 12:30 on S2 twin 4-inch and gone over the other side to the port side to have a smoke with a couple of chums. Halfway through the cigarette, I should think, when suddenly 4 columns of smoke and spouts of water straight up one side of the Eagle. And immediately she went over, and I thought, my God, she's copped it. We're in danger here.
I looked across, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Suddenly, the Eagle was steaming on our bow, keeled over. And it was obvious then that she'd been torpedoed.
Robert Sellers was a stoker on the aircraft carrier Eagle. When the torpedoes struck, he'd just come off watch.
All the lights was out. Down below you could hear lockers turning over, people squealing, got trapped under the lockers, but of course the ship was on the side. There's nothing we could do, we couldn't see anything. And I could hear water rushing in from the other side of the ship. But it was every man for himself, and that was it. I was horrified. My immediate thoughts were to all the chaps that was on watch down the boiler rooms and engine room. I just thought they couldn't stand a chance to get away. Definitely knew that they were all gone. And chaps that you'd lived with for 3 years, I mean, you just can't forget them. Yeah.
163 men lost their lives that day. News of the attack on the aircraft carrier had reached Moscow. And according to his private secretary, Churchill's face was grim when he received the first progress report on Operation Pedestal.
Pedestal according to plan, except that Eagle was sunk by U-boat south of Balearic Islands. Tomorrow, Wednesday, is the crucial day.
That was the first time I'd ever seen a warship in trouble, and believe you me, it really went home. It frightened me. I was no hero. It really frightened me to see that. And knowing what we were going to expect to go through Bomb Alley when we got there, what we had to face, we were told, submarines, aircraft, E-boats, you name it, they're all there waiting for you. We knew this, and we knew it was going to be one hell of a fight.
E la caccia di scorta porteranno ondate successive d'attacco contro il nemico. Anche gli operatori cinematografici salgono a bordo.
This bloke says to me, "Hey, I had not date yesterday." I said, "Aye, 12th August." He said, "Aye." He said, "It's grouse shooting day." He said, "And we at bloody grouse."
Suddenly we heard a bugle call. The one that we put the words to, "There's a bomber overhead, there's a bomber overhead," that meant scatter, get to your guns, quick.
L'attacco dall'aria è incominciato e ormai si protrarrà senza tregua per quasi 3 giorni.
There was dive bombers, there was high-level bombers, there was low-level bombers, there was torpedo bombers, they were all coming in the turn, but you couldn't recognize one, you didn't have time to look at them. All you had time to do was to fuse your shell, shove it up spout, fire it at the aircraft, ready for the next one going up.
40 planes coming starboard, another 40 coming port, bows, stern. Oh, I looked up, you know, like a black umbrella. All flying in rotation at the back of one another. And another cloud above, ready to drop in. Oh, I said, we're in for it now. Well, they dropped all through. We let them get so far, and then we let loose, and everybody let loose.
We were well prepared because we had intelligence and radar reports that they were coming, and there was the most tremendous gunnery barrage. Tremendous gunnery barrage. Never seen anything like it. And although some bombs were dropped, there weren't even any near misses to worry about. And we knew that a number of the aircraft had been shot down, so we went to bed that night with tails pretty high. Next day we were to pass south of Sardinia. And that's the hot day, because you're only 150 miles from the airfields, with North Africa down to the south of you. And so we knew that the next day would be a very tough day for air attack. We had 3 major air attacks that day. The noon one was a couple of hundred aircraft, bombers of every sort. And in that attack, one of the merchant ships had a near miss, the Deucalion, and her speed was reduced to 10 knots.
Deucalion got near missed by 2 bombs and hit by 1 bomb, which I suspect went through her and exploded outside, because she was not vitally damaged. But she came to a halt, because she was making water and that sort of thing. A couple of torpedo bombers came out of the murk and sank her. They popped a torpedo into her and blew a bloody good hole in her stern.
Cadono i primi colpi diretti ai bioscafi, provocando alte colonne di acqua. Il nemico si difende con un intenso fuoco di sbarramento e con la caccia levatasi dalle portaerei. Il cielo si riempie degli scoppi dei proiettili che cercano invano di contrastare l'attacco.
Planes came out, 100 young. And we batted at them. And we were doing very well. And all of a sudden, thump. That's all I heard, with a big bang. But when I got up again, I felt no through air. I come a bit water, it must have been water, and I thought, what am I doing in here?
Eddie Smith was picked out of the water by the destroyer Bicester. The oil tanker, with its precious cargo, had survived the first attack.
I tuffatori, incuranti del fuoco di sbarramento, piombano sulle navi nemiche.
It was in the evening where I think one of the most dramatic things I saw in the convoy was a flight of Stukas coming out of the sun in the evening, fairly low down, and peeling off one after the other and diving straight on to the Indomitable. There was no other target we went for.
We'd taken a direct hit just above us, 2 or 3 decks up, and we didn't see it at the time, but it pushed down the deckhead, that's the seeding, and holes were blown in the deckhead. And a little bit later you could look up and see fires burning through the holes in the deck.
There had been 3 direct hits on the aircraft carrier. 1 bomb hit the twin turrets just forward of the bridge, killing everyone inside. 60 men died in the attack, and as many again were seriously wounded.
The stench was terrible. There was burning flesh, charred remains all over the place. And then it started. After collecting the bodies up and that sort of thing, they were all laid out the following day on the flight deck.
The other ships in company came closer to us. The whole formation closed up, all with their flags at half-mast.
And then the parson started a service. We're all lined up, as you would for divisions. And my recollection of that was the bravery of the 15-year-old Royal Marine bugler who played the last post. Must have been a horrific ordeal for that boy. He played that, the band played, and the evening hymn, and we buried our dead.
With the aircraft carrier Eagle sunk and the Indomitable out of action, fighter protection for the convoy was greatly reduced. And now they'd reached the minefields that stretched between Sicily and North Africa, through which a narrow channel had been swept. Here the bigger naval ships were due to turn back, leaving the merchant ships with only their close escort.
And as we were going into there, the submarine fired a salvo of torpedoes, which was deadly, because it hit the Nigeria, which was Admiral Barrow's flagship. It hit the Cairo, and it hit the Ohio.
One of the most fateful torpedo salvos of the war, I guess.
Attack put the two cruisers, Cairo and Nigeria, out of action, and a fire broke out on the oil tanker. Within half an hour, the crew had the fire under control, and an hour later, Ohio caught up with the convoy, the oil and kerosene she was carrying still intact. But already, over the horizon, they could see more bombers approaching.
We saw in the distance another air attack. And this was an air attack on the convoy from aircraft from Sicily. And the Clan Ferguson was hit. The Empire Hope was hit, and both of those went up in a pillar of flame and were lost.
The Clan Ferguson got hit, and it was just like somebody holding a piece of rag soaked in petrol, and you put a match to it. It went, and we couldn't believe anybody would ever get off that ship. Amazing enough, they got about 60 people off her. How anybody survived, I don't know, but they did. And she went down very quickly. And of course, she was carrying our identical cargo.
And the Brisbane Star was hit by a torpedo right forward, which blew a great hole in her bows. And the captain decided that he could still do 8 knots. He couldn't keep up with the convoy, but he was damn well going to get to Malta, and so he said, "Don't worry about me, I'll go inshore and find my own way to Malta."
Of course, once we'd been hit in the bow, we couldn't keep up with the convoy, and they couldn't stay with us, so we were left on our own to make the way best we could. Our captain, he said that he decided that we'd go down inside the 3-mile limit of the African coast to give us a little bit of protection, and that's what we did.
Like most of North Africa, Tunisia was enemy territory and under the control of the Vichy French.
Next morning we got down off stacks, and there they wanted us to come in. They signalled to us to come into the port. Well, our captain didn't, and he turned to get out of the limit. They fired a shot across our bow, so the captain did stop. And the French harbour master from the port came out with the idea, I suppose, to take us into the harbour.
The French authorities came on board, but Captain Riley talked his way out of trouble, and later that day the Brisbane Star set off alone, heading for Malta. By the end of that day, including the Brisbane Star, 11 out of the 14 merchant ships were still afloat. But for the convoy, a new danger lay just ahead.
The next point was to round Cape Bon and to go inshore down the coast of Tunisia and then cut across to Malta in the morning. What we didn't know was just round the corner there were 24 German and Italian E-boats waiting for us.
Squadriglie di MAS lasciano i porti per raccogliersi nella zona stabilita per l'appostamento del convoglio.
And then as we got to Pantelleria Straits, it was getting dark. And from then onwards, right through into the night, it really was Dante's Inferno. It was unbelievable. E-boats were coming at us, and we were in a minefield.
And I suppose it was not long after midnight, about 40 minutes after midnight, when the first attack came in, and the cruiser Manchester was torpedoed in the engine room.
The next one I knew about going was our own. 1:10 in the morning on Thursday the 13th, bang, we got a tin fish aft.
The ship that I was in was about 2 cables astern of her, and I saw her hit from the director that I was in. We steamed past her, and you could hear all the men shouting and running about as we went past. She could no longer steam. She was put out of action.
The call for volunteers to get the engine room's crew out. There were about 18 of us went down, because by then our gun had packed up firing. We were too near the water chute listed that far over. Then the skipper called us all together on the upper deck, and he explained what was happening.
And she lay there for about 6 hours, and in the morning they decided the right thing to do was to scuttle her.
We had another 185 miles to go to Malta, or 890 back to Gib. In either case, we was a sitting target. And in his words, "You men cannot be replaced, the ship can. I want 40 volunteers to set scuttling charges. The remainder of you, abandon ship. Good luck and God bless you all."
Leonard MacDonald made it to the Tunisian coast 13 miles away. Along with 400 men from HMS Manchester, he was captured by the French and taken to a prison camp deep in the desert.
La notte non interrompe l'offesa sul convoglio, già in parte disperso.
From then on, there was a running battle with these E-boats, which was very, very frustrating, because it was a completely black night. They were difficult radar targets. We couldn't fire star shell because it would only illuminate our own ships. There were no targets to shoot at. At about 40-minute intervals, ships were hit. The next was Rochester Castle, which was hit in Freehold, which flooded, but it didn't reduce her speed, and so she was able to keep up. Next was Glenorchy, which went up in a pillar of flame. Beautiful short sail ship, Wairangi. And then one after the other, the 2 American ships, the Santa Elisa and the Amelia Lykes. And this was at about 45-minute intervals through the night.
We thought that we had finished running the gauntlet and that everything was going to be a smooth trip into Malta.
You could hear everything in the engine room. I mean, the vibrations of the depth charges and the guns shooting and all that. Second assistant engineer and I were sitting on a bench holding hands. That's how scared we were.
And then we saw 2 fluorescent streams coming at us. And we realized then that they were torpedoes.
And then we got hit.
Gary Superger was the U.S. Navy ensign in charge of the gun crews on the next ship to go down, the Santa Elisa.
We got along pretty well, though, until the second to last night, when a squadron of Italian motor torpedo boats, like PT boats, came out and attacked the ship at night.
The one that did the most damage was the hit us in the number 1 hold, which was high-octane gas. And all of a sudden, I had this salt water, and it tasted like gasoline coming on me.
We did the best we could during this attack, but pretty soon the ship was burning, and the captain gave orders to abandon ship.
And the flames went up like Niagara Falls backwards, and it landed on the stern.
About an hour later, the Penn came along and fished the people from the lifeboat out of the water and brought us aboard the Penn.
The 3 main rescue ships were the destroyers Penn, Bramham and Ledbury. They each now had hundreds of survivors on board.
Now we've reached the last morning and we're 80 miles from Malta. And of the 14 ships, 7 are left. We've lost 7. And right from dawn, the first German bombers appeared, only again 90, 100 miles away in Sicily. Fortunately, for the first hour or so, they concentrated on the hulks that were still burning and floating astern of us. But then about 8 o'clock, the first raid started, and quite soon they made a dead set on the biggest of the merchant ships, the Weimaraner.
Bombardieri seguono i tuffatori nel martellamento del convoglio. Ma neppure queste riescono a togliere la visibilità agli aerei. Grosse bombe arrivano a segno.
A sticker bombs hit the Weimaraner and she just blew up. It was simply terrible. The flames went up miles in the air and the black smoke. Terrible sight.
We were about 5 miles away then. She blew up and disappeared within 10 seconds, actually.
When the bombs hit the Weimaraner, John Jackson was talking to the naval liaison officer, Lieutenant Withers.
And we were in the chart room, and we were looking at the chart, and he said, "Jacko, I reckon we're going to be in Malta in 4 or 5 hours. We'll be all right." And we then heard the aircraft. It wasn't any time coming. Then suddenly they were there. We went out onto the port side of the bridge where both our action stations were. Withers was just ahead of me. There was the most enormous explosion. As he stepped out onto the bridge from the chart room over the stoop, I stepped back and a wall of flame came between the two of us. An absolute solid curtain of flame. And there it was. It didn't go away. It wasn't just one flash. That was the last I saw of Missy Withers.
When they were hit, Freddie Treves was on the forecastle with his old friend, Bo Dorey.
The bomb fell, and I was blown through the door, miraculously, and not impaled against the bulkhead, onto bags of lime, and Bo Dorey fell on top of me. And I came out from that. I thought I was going to die, and I started to get very numb.
There was thick black smoke, there was flames, there was explosions, because of course we're carrying ammunition. And I got a K-pop life jacket on, and I just jumped over the side. I don't like the water. I couldn't swim, so it had to be pretty hot to get me to do that, so in I went. And of course, by this time, the sea was on fire.
There was a huge amount of debris. I saw the bows going up, and the ship sank. And that was that. And then around me were a lot of people screaming. And I saw the wireless officer, Jackson.
And Freddie came to me in the water, and he said, "Jacko, lie on your back and don't move. I'm going to tow you away." Now, the one thing I'd always heard, drowning people always struggle. And one thing I thought, "Don't struggle, Jackson, just this guy's going to pull you away." And so he did. He got me by the arms. And as he was pulling me back, a whacking great spar of wood came along. He said, "Can you grab that spar?" So I did, and sort of heaved myself onto it. And he said, "Right, are you okay now?" So I said, "Freddie, I'm fine. You carry on. You get on. Off you go." And the fire was very near, and he went off towards the open sea, and I paddled after him. And there's no question it was an extremely brave thing for a lad to do, for a fellow of 17.
I got Jackson out, and then I saw Bodori, my friend, and help the father figure, if you like. The raft was very heavy, and he was standing, and his arms were outstretched, and it was a picture, sort of thing I remember never be able to forget, sort of screaming for help, drifting back into the flames on this raft, which he couldn't stop. And I started towards him and realized he was very near the flames. And I turned over and swam away. And that's haunted me all my life, I think.
Well, the sea was a massive flame, and the captain of the Ledbury, who was a rumbustious and, not to say erratic character, but tons of zip, tap and go, he thought, well, hell. And he actually did a thing which I suppose you get BCs for, and you deserve it. But some people might consider it foolhardy, other people would consider it terribly brave. He took his ship into the flames.
Now, you've got to realize that I had been on a convoy called PQ-17, which was a convoy to Russia, which had been ordered by the Admiralty to scatter because they thought that the Tirpitz was about to attack it. So we left the merchant ships at high speed, and it was simply terrible. Something I have never ever got over in my life, even now. That the Navy should leave the merchant Navy, and they were nearly all sunk. We got signals saying 6 U-boats approaching me on the surface, and bombers and goodness knows what. And it was in the Arctic, and if a man was 20 seconds in the water, he was dead. And my crew felt just as badly about this as I did, I can tell you that. And when we were going on this convoy to Malta, I said, as long as there's a merchant ship afloat, we stay alongside it, and to hell with any signal we get from anybody. I was determined to stay with the merchant ships, which I did. And when the Weimaraner blew up and there were all these flames, I felt I was redeeming myself for the disgrace of leaving the ships on the Russian convoy. So we went, we went into the flames.
And altogether, Roger Hill and his crew rescued 45 men. The next ship to go down was the Dorset. In the middle of the E-boat attacks the night before, Captain Tuckett had decided to leave what remained of the convoy and make his own way to Malta.
Unfortunately, she didn't make it, and halfway there, she was hit by a determined bombing attack, and she was near missed, and it put her engines out of action.
So they abandoned her, and I was told to stand by her, which was, I suppose, a sensible thing to order someone to do if you went on the scene.
The Brahmin came along, stood by the Dorset, but she was attacked again later in the day and was sunk. And so the Brahmin picked up the survivors.
And about 3 or 4 miles away, I saw the problems people were having with the poor old Ohio, and started making tracks to give a hand there.
The tanker was absolutely vital to Malta. She was slowly sinking. She had a plane which had landed on the bows, and she had another one which had landed on the stern.
And I can remember on one occasion a dive bombing attack by Stukas, and I reckon that I was the gunnery control officer. I reckon I got one of these Stukas. It passed over my head and unfortunately hit the Ohio behind me.
So she had these two planes on board. She'd had a bomb in the engine room, her funnel was crooked, and she couldn't steam at all. She was stopped in the water.
And so she was left with 3 destroyers circling around her, her crew taken off. She was only 40 miles from Malta while they waited for dark.
For the Italians, the battle was over and they'd won. Mussolini, in a handwritten note, sent his forces and their German allies a triumphant message.
The days of the 11th, 12th and 13th of August have seen your success in annihilating the enemy naval forces which have dared to venture into the seas of Rome. Britain has been forced to recognize your magnificent victory. Their ships now lie at the bottom of the sea.
But for the British, as long as there was a single merchant ship afloat, Malta could still be saved. The convoy now faced the planned final assault. The powerful Italian surface fleet had sailed, intending to pick off the remaining merchant ships.
The Italians had a plan to attack the convoy at dawn on the 13th, the last day, south of Sicily, with 4 heavy cruisers and 8 destroyers. They rendezvoused at 7 o'clock the evening before, and they were due to attack the next morning. Now, they were detected by air reconnaissance, and Wellington was put on to shadow them. And the air commander in Malta made a signal in clear, plain language to this Wellington, vital you maintain contact with this force. Force of heavy bombers will be sent in the morning. There were no heavy bombers. Now, the Italians detected this and demanded fighter escort for their ships in case they were bombed in the morning. The Germans felt that the fighters would be much better employed attacking the ships and defending the bombers, and so refused to provide the escort. And so Mussolini personally cancelled this warship sortie and ordered the ships back to harbour. With the convoy, we now only had 3 ships left. The Port Chalmers, the Melbourne Star, and the Rochester Castle. Rochester Castle with a torpedo in her, but still able to do 13 knots. Ohio stopped, and Brisbane Star, as far as we knew, doing 8 knots somewhere way back, making her own way inshore. And we had our fingers crossed for her. We'd heard nothing more about her. We took these 3 remaining ships to within 10 miles of Grand Harbour, the end of the Swept Channel, where we handed them over to the local escort of minesweepers to sweep them into Malta.
We arrived off Malta about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and proceeded into the harbour. We were the first ship, followed by the Melbourne Star and the Port Chalmers. The welcome there was absolutely fabulous. All the people were standing on the battlements, waving and cheering, and no, it was a thing you'd never forget. Never forget it.
The next day, surprising everyone, the Brisbane Star arrived. Badly damaged, but under her own steam. 4 out of 14 ships had got through. The latest cable to Churchill brought him the news of the new arrival and the uncertainty that still surrounded the tanker.
The other ship, by determination and cunning, has arrived, making the total 4. Determined efforts under heavy attack are being made to tow the oiler in. She should be approximately 40 miles from Malta at 1600 today.
Now, Ohio, of course, is an epic story of its own. She was protected by the Pen, the Brahman, and the Ledbury, and the ocean minesweeper Rye came out from Malta to help. They circled her during daylight hours while she was bombed again and again, and at night a boarding party was put back on board, headed by the first lieutenant of the Pen, Lieutenant Martin, and they did their best to tow her into Malta.
The Pen had these survivors aboard. They were all wet and cold and tired and scared and hungry, and I think one captain of one of the ships tried to go up to the bridge of the Pen and tried to get the captain to take them ashore. You know, they wanted to get off of that ship, and he said, "Get the hell off of this bridge." He said, "My mission is to bring that tanker in, and that's what I'm going to do."
There is the Ohio, an absolute hulk in the water, very heavy to tow, rudder jammed over. Every time they tried to tow her, she would veer off to one side or the other.
At first, they tried to tow the tanker from the front, steadying her midships, without much success.
I went out to Penn, and I said to him over the night, "Hailer, it wouldn't be a much better idea if we had a destroyer each side, rather than have these ships, one towing, one on the stern trying to steer her, and in fact two towing, and they were getting nowhere."
So then the next step was to pull the two destroyers alongside, one on one side, one on the other, and tie lines back and forth, and use the destroyer's engines to move the Ohio forward.
And that is what they did. Bramham and Penn tied midships to Ohio, with the Ledbury steering her by pushing with her bows.
Planes kept coming over and dropping bombs, and they'd drop a stick of bombs, and one would fall on one side of the three ships, the two destroyers and the Ohio, and one would drop on the other side, but nothing hit us.
Just when our spirits were very far down, all of a sudden Chattanooga Choo Choo came blaring forth on the PA system, and followed after that by Elmer's tune, which I guess was the other side of the record. And that went on and on and on and on for some time, and loud enough so that we could hardly hear some of the bombs falling.
Well, the Ohio had been an abandoned ship. The crew had left the ship. So when the two destroyers were lashed alongside, the guns were left vacant. So some of us went back on the Ohio and got the guns going again.
The gunner, Bill Hendy, injured when the Santa Elisa was sunk, was ordered onto the Ohio.
Went on to the Ohio, and there was a bosun there from the Santa Eliza who was doing a lot of good work there, organising, and we were throwing stuff over the side that was in the way of people moving about, bits of aircraft and bits of debris and bits of the deck and parts of the ventilating system that had crashed down and all that sort of thing. And then I got up on the Orlican.
And it took them 48 hours to do that 40 miles, something like 2 knots. But of course the next day she was within 20 miles of Malta. The Spitfires in Malta had got more fuel, and what we haven't said is while Pedestal was going on, the Furious was flying in 70 more Spitfires from Gibraltar in 2 waves, and so the Royal Air Force in Malta had got case high-octane fuel, they got more ammunition, and on the last day they protected the Ohio.
We felt a bit more secure when we saw them. Everybody cheered, because as you know, the aircraft carriers weren't with us any longer. So we were relying on the Spitfire from Malta to get us in.
With hundreds of the rescued men on the destroyers, food was in short supply.
Before we got within reach of Malta, the captain okayed it for them to go down below and and take some of the stores. So they broke apparently into the Christmas locker, or got the key of the pantry or something. And they all come up, and I think they'd had a few drinks while they were down there, and brought up drink and anything that was, you know, chocolate and stuff like that. And being an American boat, it was pretty well, you know, stocked with stuff. And they broke open the Christmas locker, and they all come up wearing these funny hats. So what you'd got was that the gunners on the Pen and the Brun were wearing these Kiss Me Quick hats, you know, coloured hats up on the guns. So I don't know what the German pilots thought of that. You know, I thought, well, I might as well pack in. You know.
Eventually, in that evening, we sighted Malta. My word, that was exciting. There we could see Malta in the distance.
On August the 15th, 1942, into Malta's Grand Harbour, helped by tugs and still with the destroyer Bramham tied to her port side, sailed Ohio. You could almost reach into the water from her decks. She was scarcely afloat.
And the feeling of seeing the entrance to Grand Harbour was unbelievable joy. The crowds were lining the quayside, cheering. The band was playing. And as a kid, it was unbelievable. It's like boys' own stuff. You actually felt a hero. You felt you'd done something. It was quite remarkable.
From Moscow, a relieved Churchill sent the fleet in the Mediterranean his congratulations.
The crash through of supplies to Malta has been accomplished magnificently, and the immediate future of the war in the Mediterranean is bound to be affected to an important extent by this achievement.
The arrival of the convoy was linked to the Feast of Santa Maria. The Maltese are religious people, and the Feast of Santa Maria is an important one, and the arrival was also interpreted as the hearing of the prayers by the good Lord and Our Lady. And that was the calling the convoy Santa Maria is only an evidence of the faith and a compliment to the historic event itself.
It was a most amazing, wonderful sight to see all these people who had suffered so much cheering us for just coming in, you know. And it was really the most wonderful moment of my life, I think.
From Roger Hill's Ledbury and the Bramham and the Pen, the survivors from the merchant ships came ashore.
So we got us together and straggled along, you know, in all sorts of dress, life jackets on and looking a little bit bedraggled, and marched us through Valletta. And there again the streets were lined with people. And as we just trailed our way through, picking our way through a lot of this rubble, you know, they were cheering, and a little old lady came out of the crowd and said to me, "God bless you, son." And she gave me a little wooden crucifix. And I took it off her, and I thought myself, after all what these people have suffered, years of bombardment, the most bombed island in the world, and yet she's still got enough compassion to give us that really they'd only had about 5 days of it, you know, and they suffered all that lack of food and lack of medical attention and all that the siege brings on people. And that touched me a bit, you know.
And that was Pedestal. 5 out of 14 ships arrived, 50,000 tons of stores of every sort, fuel, food, ammunition, and Malta did not have to surrender. And of course on the 22nd of October, El Alamein, And in those months up to October, the aircraft and the submarines operating from Malta sunk 300,000 tons of Axis supply shipping, which Rommel would have dearly liked to have had at Alamein. And on November the 7th, the Allies invaded North Africa at the other end. And that really was the turning point of the war. But if Pedestal had not got through, Malta would have had to surrender, and anybody's guess what would have happened.